everyone. My name is Jared Jones, and I'm an associate licensed mental health counselor here at Care to Change. I specialize in working with teens and young adults who struggle with depression, anxiety, suicide, self-harm, trauma, and other mood and impulse-related difficulties. I've been working at Care to Change for about a year and a half now, and I'm here to talk to you today about depression and some of the prevalence, symptoms, causes, and treatment for depression. Now, depression is a word that's thrown around a lot today. There's many different ways that we can label depression, that we can call things depression, but what actually is depression? What do we mean when we say someone is depressed? And what does it look like when we need to maybe talk to a friend or a pastor about how we're feeling depressed, or when we need to go to a professional to get help with it? So when I refer to depression, we usually use it in tandem with the term major depression. Now, major depression is an actual set of criteria. There's a specific thing that major depression looks like. Major depression are those really deep down periods. Those really begin to interrupt your life. They make you struggle with being able to function in just your daily routine. Whereas depression in itself is just a feeling that we experience normally as humans. You know, some days we say that we're feeling depressed. Maybe after we've had the loss of a loved one or something that was really valuable or important to us in our life, we say we're feeling depressed. So depression is a normal experience that we all have as humans. Major depression is when it becomes a problem, begins to interrupt life, and that's going to be really the focus of our talk today. So why is it important to talk about depression? Well, as of 2017, it's one of the leading mental illnesses in the country and even around the world. The National Institute of Mental Health even says that it's the leading cause of suicide. So for individuals who die by suicide, depression tends to be the #1 cause or quickly related to someone's death by suicide. And the National Institute of Mental Health also claims that at least 7.1% of US adults, so almost 1 in 10 US adults, have had a major depressive episode. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 1 in 10 or 7% have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It's just that they've experienced a major depressive episode at some point in their life. So to kind of tease those apart, a major depressive episode, for the criteria we'll talk about later, is just a period of time when that depression kind of crosses the line into major depression, and it usually lasts for a significant amount of time. Now, in order to get diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, this depressive episode or multiple depressive episodes have to be recurrent for a long amount of time. This is a depression that goes on for a very long time, something that, you know, it's not necessarily related to a specific event, or you've tried to work your way through it and you haven't been able to overcome that depression at any point in your process. The prevalence of depression is pretty high. In fact, at least 17.1 million adults in the US have experienced a major depressive episode in 2017. And 11 million of those 17 million have had so with a significant impairment, meaning their depression got to the point to where they couldn't work, they couldn't take care of their kids, they might not have been able to take care of themselves. Also to note about the prevalence is depression, or the diagnosis of major depression, is higher in females. It's also higher in young adults, typically in the teenage and young 20s years, and people who identify as mixed race tend to have a higher prevalence of major depression and have had an episode. So let me explain a little bit of what a major depressive episode looks like, because major depression is very different, like we said, than just depression. You may have felt depressed at some point in your life. Maybe there was a significant moment where you had a major loss, you had a major transition. Maybe life was getting just kind of stale. You began to lose interest in things that you normally had interest in. You began to not want to spend time around individuals. Maybe you struggled to get done some of the normal functions. You didn't feel as involved with some of the things that you normally enjoy, like hobbies or activities or pastimes. And it begins to take that away from you. Maybe you begin to feel a sense of dread or hopelessness, worthlessness, or isolation. You struggle to get out of bed, or you find yourself being more tired all the time. These are some of the symptoms that you might be feeling depressed, and these might be keys that you are experiencing major depression. So there's different types of depressive disorders. I've talked about major depressive disorder, and we'll get into the criteria here for that in a second. But you could also have a series of different depressive disorders that all look at depression a little bit differently. For instance, there's dysthymia, which is a depressive disorder where you go through periods of kind of a shallow depression over and over again. There's postpartum depression for mothers who have just given birth. It's very common, or I should say it's not uncommon, for women to go through a period of depression right after they've given birth to their child. We'll talk about some of the causes and what may have been leading to that depression later, but we're going to focus specifically on major depression. I just want to let you know that there's more ways than just this that a clinical depression can happen in your life. So as the DSM quotes, some of the criteria for a major depressive episode include persistent, sad, anxious, or empty feelings. So again, like I said, just not feeling yourself, feeling very down, feeling very isolated, just not feeling like you have the energy or motivation to do anything. We talked about feelings of hopelessness or pessimism. That's also another sign or criteria for major depression. Irritability, so finding yourself quickly angered, quickly frustrated. When your kid or your spouse or your coworker comes to you with a problem, you find yourself getting really upset by that problem and maybe out of proportionate so. Or you find yourself wanting to escape from problems more. Whenever something that you normally could handle in life comes up, you turn away from it and you choose not to handle it, or maybe put it off until it either goes away or becomes an even worse problem. Another criteria is feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, like I had shared earlier. A lot of times we feel, or a person who struggles with major depression would feel like their life doesn't matter. Like they feel guilty about the bad things that they've done. They focus on the negative and feeling like they can't get out of this experience, like they're no good for other people, those sort of feelings. Other criteria include loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies. We talked about that, where you don't enjoy the things that you used to enjoy anymore. And even when you're invited or have the opportunity to do those things, you choose not to just because you don't really feel like it. And it's not because other interests have taken over. It's just a loss of interest in everything that you want to do in your free time. Decreased energy or fatigue is one of those criteria as well. Moving or talking more slowly. Oftentimes when someone is going through a major depressive episode, they feel like everything around them happens more slowly. Everything slows down. They begin to struggle with, being able to do things as quickly as they used to. It takes them longer to get up and out of bed and get ready in the morning. It takes them longer to do certain activities or expectations throughout the day, just because their body's moving slower. It's weighed down by this emotion that they're experiencing. And so they really don't have the energy or the push to do things at the normal rate that they used to do. Another criteria is feeling restless or having trouble like sitting still. Sometimes when we're experiencing depression, we get to this point where we don't really feel comfortable anywhere. Our body is too active and it wants to get away from certain situations. It wants us to continue being moving, continue being up and being in motion. And that might be one of the criteria as well. Difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. That's another criteria that's pretty common. When we are experiencing a major depressive episode, it begins to weigh on us on our mind too. It weighs our thoughts down to where we can't focus on things like we used to. Our mind is not clear to think in the ways that we need to be thinking. And so it continues to weigh on us and make it hard for us to function normally and concentrate and focus on the things we need to focus on. Another criteria is difficulty sleeping, early morning awakening, or oversleeping. People who are depressed tend to have one or the other, where they tend to sleep too little, or they tend to sleep too much, or just sleep all throughout the day. Oftentimes when we experience a major depressive episode, it will make us not want to be involved in any activities, and just to the point of where we just want to stay in bed. And that will lead to oversleeping, or maybe we feel a slight bit of anxiety or restlessness to where, we lay ourselves down in bed at night, we feel tired, but we just can't seem to get to sleep. And that continues to weigh on us and cause more of those symptoms of depression as well. Another really common one with major depression is changes in appetite or weight gain or loss. So someone who may be going through a major depressive episode will suddenly reduce their eating or be eating way too much. Eating may become something that seems like a burden, or it may be a coping mechanism that's being used to help work through those difficult feelings. And oftentimes when our eating changes, our weight will change as well. Someone will, stop eating so much, maybe go down to eating one or less meals a day, and they begin to lose a ton of weight because they're not eating as much. Or someone who is using eating as a coping mechanism through their depression suddenly gains a lot of weight because they just have so many more calories in their diet. Those can be criteria to look out for with major depression. And then lastly, and we talked about this before, with major depression being one of the leading causes of suicide, the criteria of having thoughts of death or suicide attempts, or being preoccupied with death are the final criteria. So if someone is so miserable and so low in their mood that they just don't feel like being alive anymore, they feel like it would be better if they were dead, they may be actually making plans or having active thoughts about killing themselves or doing something to harm themselves. So these are some of the things to look out for with major depression. Again, someone might be able to have these criteria and they might be going through some depression, but it might not necessarily be a major depressive episode. So I share all of these things to give you some hints in case you or someone you know may be experiencing these, but definitely talk to a professional and get it diagnosed if you feel like you're struggling with major depression. I'd like to talk about some of the causes that may be leading to depression, because there's a lot of stigma against mental illness and depression. We tend to think that, our struggles with our mental health are something that we've done to ourselves or something that we have been kind of neglectful of. But honestly, there's a lot of different causes that lead to depression. Science talks about all kinds of different ways that people become depressed in their life. For one, we know that depression can be genetically linked. If you have family history of people who are depressed, you're more likely of experiencing a major depressive episode in your life. And that has nothing to do with you or who you are or what you've done with your life. You're just more prone to it because it's in your genes. And you shouldn't feel bad about that. In fact, you should recognize that if you have a family history of depression, you should be mindful of that and share that with a counselor or share that with your doctor and pay attention to that when you begin to notice these signs and symptoms. And take that and also think about with your kids as well. If you have a family history of that, you're passing those genes on to them potentially. And so you want to look for these in loved ones and relatives and people who you have some kind of genetic relation to. Another cause or potential cause of depression is like life experience and learned in our life. Sometimes we just go through really hard times that begin to make us feel depressed. And, it's a normal reaction to the event that was going on at the time, but then it begins to weigh on us more and more. And it becomes the pattern that we give into that now, instead of having a period of depression or maybe having some of those symptoms, it rolls into an episode of major depression and it lasts for months at a time. So, these might be major life transitions, losing a loved one, which most of us would feel a natural period of depression after. But if you've lost a loved one and you continue to feel that months and years after, where you just can't get up in the morning and you just can't function and you're experiencing much of this criteria, then you might be having a major depressive episode. Other things of life experience may be, maybe you had a loved one or a parent who struggled with depression and, you kind of adopted their behavior from them. You did things that kind of reinforce some of that depression in your life. And it's not that it's your fault. It's just that whenever we see how parents and how other loved ones, maybe friends or siblings or people in our life cope with emotions, we tend to adopt those coping strategies as well, much like we may learn how to cook from our parents, or we may learn how to do other things around the house or in life with people that we love. So just pay attention to what life experiences you may have gone through and how that may be influencing your feelings of depression. Depression can also be medically induced. A lot of times people who go through surgeries, who go through medical procedures, anything like that can cause depression afterward. Especially if you go through something like chemotherapy with cancer, that would be a really common one that, going through something that makes you feel as miserable as that, and that just makes you feel down and changes your appearance and it changes the feelings of your body and how you're experiencing yourself, may lead to a major depressive episode after that. So if you know that you've gone through a medical procedure or you have a medical condition or you're on some kind of medical therapy that's making changes in your body, it could induce a major depressive episode. And you want to be very clear with your doctor if you're experiencing those feelings, and maybe even seek counseling to help overcome those challenges and work through a major depressive episode that might be caused by medication. Another way that that they might be medically induced is people who are recovering from, say, like drug and alcohol abuse. A lot of times when we get stuck in addictions or other really bad patterns of behavior where we depend on external substances, it can begin to cause us to become dependent on those. Of course, we've gone through an addiction with that, but dependence on that so much for our own happiness and enjoyment in life. And when you take away the alcohol, or you take away the cigarettes, you take away the thing that was making us feel happy or we associated with our happiness, it begins to create some of these symptoms that we see in major depression. And it could even lead to a full-blown major depressive episode if we're not careful about having appropriate coping mechanisms and replacing those addictive behaviors with something that's adaptive and helpful. So pay attention to whatever medically might have been going on or biologically might have been changing with your body, because it could lead to an episode. Another one that I kind of wanted to separate and put on itself because it kind of crosses many of these different categories is trauma. A traumatic event changes how the brain is wired. If you go through trauma, your brain is forever different, and you're having significant symptoms that may lead to a major depressive episode. In fact, most of the time, the criteria to know that someone has gone through trauma is usually either anxiety or depression or both. If someone is having these episodes and they have a traumatic event that's happened in their life, it tends to be a good hint that there's a connection between the two. And so if your major depression or if some of these symptoms you're experiencing is linked to a specific traumatic life event, you'll need to be careful to work with a therapist who can help you overcome that trauma and work through that, because many of those symptoms may be coming from that trauma. And so if there's been some trauma that you've buried in your life and you're struggling with depression, don't just talk to someone about the depression. Open up about the trauma to your comfort level, but maybe push yourself just a little bit more so that way you can address the trauma and be able to work through major depression, because the trauma may be the source of it. And then there are all kinds of other reasons that people may go through depression. You know, some people just go through hard periods of their life. Some individuals, if you've been around someone who's struggled with depression, may begin to experience those signs and symptoms as well. There's other reasons that may be underlying as to why someone is going through a major depressive episode. Some people are just born naturally where they tend to have more of a depressive cycle through their life, where they'll go for many years where they're feeling pretty good, and then they'll have several months or maybe even years where they go through a major depressive episode. And that may just be their life experience. There's not anything necessarily wrong or bad about them. That's just their experience. And so being able to get yourself help in those times when you're having those major depressive episodes and being able to find that right help for people to support you through those is most important when it comes to those other reasons. So I talked about some of the causes for depression. And one thing I want to make very clear is that just because you may have depression from one of these causes or you're experiencing this in your life does not mean that you cannot get help or that you are unhelpable. There is always help to be able to work through depression. If you are beginning to experience this, I will say that research shows that medication and therapy both are effective against depression. Many different therapeutic approaches and many different medications have helped hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people before overcome their depression. And so if you begin to feel these things, I would encourage you to seek help from either a doctor or some other mental health professional to be able to find treatment for this. Research also says that for major depression and on top of that anxiety, that medication and psychotherapy in tandem together actually are more effective than either of them are separate. So if you are struggling with a major depressive episode, if you feel like you want to talk to someone and you just don't know where to start, I would say start with both. You know, find a doctor, maybe your family practitioner, or maybe you can get referred to a psychiatrist who would be able to start you on medication while also signing up to meet with a counselor, a therapist, someone who can help provide you those skills, who can listen to you, who can talk with you through your life experience and begin to help change that for you. Because in tandem, they work the best. But those aren't the only treatments. Sometimes those are not enough. Other individuals experience depression that may come from something that's more biological, that can't just be helped with medication or therapy, or they might have undergone something in their life that really makes those ineffective. There are all kinds of other treatments that you can find. In fact, there's a pretty popular one called ECT. I believe it's some kind of electroconvulsive therapy, which sounds really scary, but really what it is it's a treatment for depression for people who have more of a biological brain cause of depression. And they actually stimulate your brain by putting electrodes on your scalp and actually stimulating your brain waves in a way that was supposed to reduce your depression. It is research-based and it is shown to be effective. And oftentimes people who can't recover from major depression from therapy and medication will undergo this treatment and begin to find remission from it. And there are all kinds of other ways that you can get treatment for depression. Now, on top of that, I want to add there are ways that can feel like they help with depression, but in fact, they actually don't. So any kind of behavior that becomes compulsive or impulsive or is a maladaptive coping strategy you want to avoid. Alcohol and drugs are not a good thing to turn to. It's one thing to get medication that's carefully monitored from your doctor and you're following that prescription carefully. It's another thing to be able to find some kind of medication or some kind of drug or substance that you're using to self-medicate. A lot of people, talk about different drugs that are now becoming more legal in the US as being an effective treatment for depression, which I will say, yes, when it's carefully monitored and adjusted by a prescribing physician. A lot of times we talk about THC as being an effective treatment for depression, and research is coming out that's somewhat supporting that. But we want to be very careful about don't use that on your own. Do not self-medicate to treat your depression, because what might happen is you might make yourself accidentally dependent on that, or your depression might continue to get worse and you feel like just using more and more of this coping strategy is going to help you get out of it, when really it won't. You need some professional help or maybe procedures above and beyond what that thing can do for you. So just be careful with the different approaches. And sometimes it may just be a combination of different things. We talk about depression being helped by, exercise and eating healthy and being around friends, which I want to be very careful to say major depression isn't simply treated by getting more exercise and getting out more and doing these things. But if you are in therapy, if you are in treatment, if you're receiving medication and you're working through those skills and you begin to see an improvement, then it might give you the opportunity to begin using these strategies to help you further your mental health even more. So I'd like to wrap up today by giving you 3 practical tips to take away from today's discussion. So the first one, and I've heard this time and time again, and I just want to normalize this for everyone. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay if you're struggling with a major depressive episode. It's okay if it feels like your life is falling apart right now. It's okay that you feel like you can't be yourself anymore, that you've lost all your interests in life, or you're noticing some of these other signs and symptoms. It's okay that you feel this way, but it's not okay for you to let yourself continue to feel this way. So I want to normalize that to let you know many, many people, we just talked about 17.1 million Americans in a single year had experienced a major depressive episode. You are not alone, and there is help out there available for you. So my second practical tip to take away from today is do not wait. If you begin to experience these symptoms, if you begin to experience some of these things we talked about today, if you find yourself self-medicating, or if you find certain things that you're doing in your life to try and improve your mood not working, go talk to a professional, because the professional is going to be able to give you that experience and that advice that you need to be able to start recovering and reverse some of these challenges that you're seeing with a major depressive episode. So do not wait. And if you know someone who's experiencing these things and they're struggling to feel like they can go talk to someone about them, encourage them. Sit down and listen to them and try and tell them, it's really bad to let this problem go from bad to worse. Let's go talk to someone. And in fact, in counseling, we really invite the people that come to us to bring a loved one, to bring someone who cares about them into session with them. If it's easier for you to talk to a counselor, if you have your spouse or your best friend or someone significant in your life, maybe a parent to be with you, that's okay. Bring them too. We are open to receiving that. Whatever is going to get you in sooner will help you sooner so you can avoid some of the negative consequences that come from putting it off and waiting until it's too late. My last tip I want to leave you with today is to treat your mental health like you would your physical health. If you got some kind of injury in your knee and your knee was hurting you, or you had some pain in your left ankle and it's been going on for a week now and it's not really going away, you would take yourself into a doctor. You would take yourself in to see someone and to see, did I get it sprained? Is there something wrong with it? Do I have any kind of internal damage? Do I just need to get some kind of brace for it and it'll heal up okay? You would be able to go to someone and find that fix for it. So why not treat your mental health that way? If you've been feeling down for several weeks, if you just can't break out of this mood and you're struggling to take yourself out of it, don't keep putting it off. Treat it like if you had something going on with your body physically. Treat emotional pain like you would physical pain and go get it checked out by someone. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to commit yourself to counseling or commit yourself to medication. All you need to do is just go check in with someone. Go to someone who's familiar with depression, who's familiar with these symptoms, so that way they can give you some guidance on this, just to be sure. Because, if it really is not a big deal, if it's something that is just a phase you're going through and you're going to overcome it, or you feel like you have a handle on it, then they'll come to that same conclusion with you in session. We'll just get that confirmation and affirm, yeah, you're going through this, but it seems like you have the right coping skills. It seems like you're working enough with yourself through this that you can get to the other side. So treat your mental health like you would your physical health. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to invite you guys to follow us on social media. Follow Care to Change on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for more information like this, for upcoming events and other flyers and blogs that we post online. We additionally have a podcast that we release on a weekly basis on Tuesdays with several topics related to this and many other mental health topics. So I really want you to follow those and, be a part of the conversation. If you have any questions for today, feel free to leave comments, or if you have questions for us specifically, you want to know more, or maybe talk about potentially getting set up to consult about some of the things discussed in the video today, then reach out to us. Our main number is 317-790-9396, or email us at help@caretochange.org. Again, I thank you for joining us today, and I hope that this has offered some helpful skills and practical tips for you guys. And I look forward to being able to see you guys or hear from you in the future. Thank you.